So a clause can be used as an adjective. So when you have something like the blue shirt, blue is an adjective that modifies the noun shirt. So a clause is a group of words that has a subject and a verb. A clause, an independent clause, is a complete sentence. A dependent clause is not a complete sentence. An adjective clause is a dependent clause that modifies a noun. An adjective clause has pronouns like who, whose, which, that, and whose. An adjective clause pronouns used as the subject. I thank the woman who helped me. I thank the woman that helped me. And then who helped me is an adjective phrase. So here, who helped me is an adjective phrase, adjective clause that modifies the noun woman. The book is mine. It is on the table. The book which is on the table is mine. And so which is on the table is an adjective clause that modifies the noun book. I saw the man, he closed the door. I saw the man who closed the door. The girl is happy, she won the race. The girl who is happy ran the girl who is happy won the race. The student is from China, he sits next to me. The student who is from China sits next to me. The students are from China, they sit in the front row. The students who sit in the front row are from China. We are studying sentences that contain adjective phrases. We are studying sentences that contain adjective phrases. And so that contains adjective phrases is the modifies sentences, which is a noun. I am using a sentence. It contains an adjective clause. And so I am using a sentence that contains an adjective clause is an adjective clause that modifies the noun sentence. Adjective clause pronouns used as the object of a preposition. She is the woman about whom I told you. She is the woman whom I told you about. She is the woman that I told you about. She is the woman I told you about. And so she is the woman about whom I told you is the adjective clause that modifies woman. Whom I told you about is the adjective clause that modifies the noun woman. The music was good. We listened to it last night. The music to which we listened to last night was good. The music which we listened to was good. The music that we listened was good. The music we listened was good. So in very formal English, the preposition comes at the beginning of the adjective clause. Usually, however, in everyday use, the preposition comes after the subject and verb of the adjective clause, as in the other examples. If the preposition comes at the beginning of the adjective clause, only whom and which may be used. A preposition is never followed by that or who. And so the woman about whom I told you, very formal English. And woman I told you about, very not formal English, spoken English. Usual patterns of adjective clauses. I like the people who live next to me. So who live next to me is formal English. Less formal is I like the people that live next to me. Who live next to me is an adjective clause that modifies the word, the noun, people. That live next to me modifies the noun, people. I like books that have good plots. So that have good plots is an adjective clause that modifies books. I met last night modifies people. I read last week modifies book. So every time you have an adjective clause, it modifies the noun. In everyday informal usage, often one adjective clause pattern is used more commonly than another, as a subject pronoun who is more common than that, as a subject pronoun that is more common than which. Object pronouns are commonly omitted, especially in speaking. She lectured on a topic that I know very little about. The students missed the assignment for which they were absent from class. Yesterday, I ran into an old friend whom I hadn't seen for years. The young women are all from Japan. We met them at the meeting last night. The young women we met at the meeting last night are all from Japan. I am reading a book that was written by Jane Austen. So that was written by Jane Austen is an adjective clause that modifies book. Whose. Whose is used to show possession. It carries the same meaning as other possessive pronouns used as adjectives. His, her, its, and, their. His, her, its, their, whose. So his bicycle, whose bicycle. Her composition, whose composition. Both whose and the noun is connected to and are placed at the beginning of the adjective clause. Whose cannot be omitted. I know the man. His bicycle was stolen. I know the man whose bicycle was stolen. The student writes well. I read her composition. The student whose composition I read writes well. Mr. Cat has a painting. Its value is a lot. Mr. Cat has a painting whose value is a lot. And so whose value is a lot is an adjective phrase, is an adjective clause that modifies the noun painting. Whose composition I read modifies student. Whose bicycle was stolen modifies noun, and therefore they are all adjective clauses. They are all adjective phrases. So whose is used to show possession. So I know the man whose bicycle was stolen. So whose bicycle was stolen is the adjective clause that modifies the noun man. Whose composition I read is the adjective clause that modifies the noun student. Whose value is a lot is an adjective clause that modifies the noun painting. Using where in adjective clauses. Where is used as an adjective clause to modify a place. So the building where he lives. So where he lives is an adjective clause that modifies building. Using when in adjective clauses. When is used to modify a noun showing time, year, century. So I'll never forget the day when I met you. I'll never forget the day on which I met you. So when I met you is an adjective clause that modifies the word, the noun, day. Using adjective clauses to modify pronouns. There is someone whom I want you to meet. Everything he said was pure nonsense. Anybody who wants to come is welcome. Adjective clauses can modify indefinite pronouns, object pronouns, but you cannot use an adjective clause to modify personal pronouns. I, who am a student in the school, come from the country in Asia. It is I who am responsible. So you cannot use an adjective clause to modify personal pronouns. Punctuating adjective clauses. Do not use commas if the adjective clause is necessary to identify the noun it modifies. Use commas if adjective clauses simply give additional information and is not necessary to identify the noun it modifies. So A, the professor who teaches Chemistry 101 is an excellent lecturer. No commas are necessary because the adjective clause is necessary to identify which professor is meant. Professor Williams, who teaches Chemistry 101, is an excellent professor. So commas are used. The adjective clause is not necessary to identify a Professor Wilson. We already know who he is because he has a name. So the adjective clause simply gives additional information. Hawaii, which consists of 8 principal islands, is a favorite vacation spot. Use commas if an adjective clause modifies a proper noun. Mrs. Smith, who is a retired teacher, does volunteer work at the hospital. And so here you have Mrs. Smith is a proper noun, so you have to use commas. The man that I met teaches chemistry. Mr. Lee, whom I met yesterday, teaches chemistry. So the man whom I met teaches chemistry. If no commas are used, any possible pronoun may be used in the adjective clause. Object pronouns may be omitted. Mr. Lee, whom I met yesterday, teaches chemistry. When commas are necessary, the pronoun that may not be used. Only who, whom, which, whose, where, and when may be used, and object pronouns cannot be omitted. We took some children on a picnic. The children who wanted to play soccer ran to an open field. So the use of commas means that all of the children wanted to play soccer and all of the children ran to an open field. The adjective clause is only used to give additional information about the children. We took some children on a picnic. The children who wanted to play soccer ran to an open field as soon as we arrived at the park. The others played a different game. The lack of commas means that only some of the children wanted to play soccer. The adjective clause is used to identify which children ran to the open field and which children played a different game. So basically I tell students that if do not use commas if the adjective clause is necessary to identify the noun it modifies. Do use commas if the adjective clause simply gives additional information and is not necessary to identify the noun it modifies. That's the main rule. So if it is not necessary, okay, then you use commas. If the information is not necessary, and if the information is necessary, so do not use commas if the information here, like the professor who teaches Chemistry 101, here the information is necessary because we don't know which professor you're talking about. So you have to have, so there's no commas. Here you name the professor, Professor Wilson, so therefore you have additional information and therefore you use commas. So you use commas for additional information. Using expressions of quantity in adjective clauses. In my class, there are 20 students. Most of them are from the Far East. In my class, there are 20 students, most of whom are from Asia. An adjective clause may contain an expression of quantity, like some of, many of, most of, two of, half of, neither of. The expression of quantity precedes the pronoun. Only whom and which and whose are used in this pattern. Adjective clauses that begin with an expression of quantity are more common in writing than speaking. So in my class, there are 20 students. Most of them are from the Far East. And so most people just split the two sentences that way. And then in written English, you would say, in my class, there are 20 students, most of whom are from Asia. We have an antique table. The top of it has a jade inlay. We have an antique table, the top of which has a jade inlay. So the top of which has a jade inlay is an adjective phrase that modifies the noun antique table. So an adjective clause may include a noun plus of which or the top of which. This pattern carries the meaning of whose. We have an antique table whose top has a jade inlay. This pattern is used in an adjective clause that modifies a thing and occurs primarily in formal written English. A comma is used. We toured a 300-year-old house, the exterior of which consisted of logs cemented with clay. They own an original Picasso painting, the value of which is more than $1 million. I bought a magazine, the title of which is Contemporary Architectural Design. My country is dependent upon its income from coffee, the price of which fluctuates according to the world market. the genetic engineers are engaged in significant experiments, the result of which will be published in the Journal of Science. The professor has assigned the students a research paper, the purpose of which is to acquaint them with methods of scholarly inquiry. Tom was late. That surprised me. So then, Tom was late, which surprised me. So the pronouns that and this can refer to the idea of a whole sentence which comes before. So the word that refers to the whole sentence, Tom was late. And so similarly, an adjective clause with which may modify the idea of a whole sentence. In C, the word which refers to the whole sentence, Tom was late. So Tom was late, which surprised me. So the word which modifies this entire sentence. So this entire sentence is like a noun, and that this which is an adjective clause that modifies an entire sentence. The elevator is out of order. That is too bad. And so the elevator is out of order, which is too bad. So using which to modify a whole sentence is informal and occurs most frequently in spoken English. This structure is generally not appropriate in formal writing. Whenever it is written, however, it is preceded by a comma to reflect a pause in speech. Max isn't home yet. That worries me. Max isn't home yet, which worries me. My roommate never picks up after herself. This irritates me. My roommate never picks up after herself, which irritates me. Mrs. Anderson responded to my letter right away. I appreciated that very much. Mrs. Anderson responded to my letter right away, which I appreciated very much. Using noun plus of which. An adjective clause may include a noun plus of which. This pattern carries the meaning of whose. We have an antique table whose top has a jade lining. This pattern is used in an adjective clause that modifies a thing and occurs primarily in formal written English. A comma is used. We have an antique table. The top of it has a jade inlay. We have an antique table, the top of which has a jade inlay. Reducing adjective clauses to adjective phrases. A clause is a group of related words that contains a subject and a verb. A phrase is a group of words that does not contain a subject and a verb. The girl who is sitting next to me is Maria. The girl sitting next to me is Maria. Adjective clause. Who is sitting next to me modifies the noun girl. Adjective phrase. Sitting next to me modifies the noun girl. And so always when you have who is, you have who is the subject, is the verb in that clause. So that becomes an adjective clause. And then sitting next to me has no who and is, so it's a phrase. And so when people are talking in spoken English, they omit who and is. So when we're writing in formal English, we would write the girl who is sitting next to me, and if we're talking, we would say the girl sitting next to me. They have the exact same meaning. The boy who is playing the piano and the boy playing the piano, they both have the same meaning. It's just that who is playing the piano is an adjective phrase, an adjective clause that modifies the noun boy, and playing the piano is an adjective phrase that modifies the noun boy, and this is playing the piano is used in spoken English. Who is playing the piano is written in formal written English. Changing an adjective clause to, so that's the same thing. Anytime that you omit something, then that's for spoken English, and anytime you write who is, which are, or who is responsible, that is written English. So whenever we write the whole thing, that is written English, and whenever we reduce the adjective clause or an adjective to an adjective phrase, then it becomes spoken English. So there are two ways in which an adjective clause is changed to an adjective phrase. If the adjective clause contains the be form of a verb. So who is, which are, who is. So you can get rid of who is and just put in the man talking to John instead of saying the man who is talking to John. So the man talking to John is less formal, and the man who is talking to John is more formal in English. Paris, which is the capital of France, is an exciting city. So I take out the which and the is, and it becomes Paris, the capital of France. I read a book which is written by a famous American author. So which is written is not included, and therefore adjective phrases. So and then when you have adjective phrases in which a noun follows another noun, these are also known as appositives. Okay, so Paris, the capital of. So another way of saying reduced adjective phrase is an appositive. That's the end of this video, and this whole video was about how adjectives modify nouns, like a blue shirt or a green shirt or an ugly person. So ugly would modify the noun. And so if I say a person who is ugly, so who is ugly is the adjective clause that modifies a person, which has the same meaning. So a person who is ugly has the same meaning as an ugly person. So we end this video on adjective clauses. So we know that clauses can be used as adjectives and as nouns. And in chapter 14, we're not going to be talking about clauses or phrases anymore. We're going to take a break from that, and we're going to talk about gerunds and infinitives. And so this ends this video about adjective clauses. If you have any questions, you can always email me